Now that we have labeled the map and some of the landforms in the area, some of the framing cultural thoughts that we need to get straight about this region are that we have a lot of influence from the West and kind of from the North. And that convergence, you can see it in the name, right? It's called Southeast Asia. And there is influence from East Asia and influence from South Asia. And we can see this across many parts of the culture. We have this cultural influence from the larger, more powerful influences and empires on either side. And you can see these patterns in the religion, you can see it in the food. There are many different aspects where you can see kind of that push from both sides. And one example is that a lot of the food here has curry flavors. So those would have come from South Asia, that kind of spice profile, those kinds of tastes. But it is eaten with chopsticks, which came from East Asia. In South Asia, you eat with your hands or you eat with naan, with bread. But in East Asia, you are more likely to be eating with chopsticks. So we have flavors and cultural practices coming from both sides. Another example of this cultural influence on the area is through religion. Hinduism arrived from South Asia fairly early on in its history, and there was a massive Hindu kingdom, several that not only dominated the insular parts of Southeast Asia, but also was found on the continent as well. And we will see some pieces of that in a minute. But Buddhism actually came in from East Asia, which is interesting because, as we know from our last region, Buddhism also evolved here in South Asia. But Buddhism came to this area more over land. So once Buddhism spread this way into East Asia, into China, and then Korea and Japan in this area, and then it came into Vietnam and other parts of this area. So Hinduism crossed this way over the land, but also over the water. Buddhism came from the north. So this is another example of the cultural influence from the two larger empires, the two large cultural forces on either side of this region. Okay? So Hinduism from India and Buddhism from China. And this is the overall pattern of religion here. You can see that Buddhism is still quite widespread on the mainland, but we also have a lot of traditional indigenous religions as well. And then, why do we have Roman Catholicism here? Why is that? What's going on that with this? Well, that's because of colonization. And Spain, of course, colonized the Philippines. It is named after King Philip of Spain. That's where it got its name. So this area is Catholic because the Spanish brought that there. And then here we have Indonesia, which has Islam is in this area. It's also the main country in Malaysia. And Indonesia is the world's most populous Muslim country. There are more than 200 million Muslims in Indonesia. That is more Muslims than there are in what is traditionally thought of as the quote, Middle East. Okay, so this is the most populous Muslim country in the world. It came largely through trade. People crossing the Indian Ocean. Remember that the Arabian Peninsula is not all that far away, but that is how it got here. But we do have remnants of that Hindu kingdom that I told you about a minute ago. It was very widespread across the islands here and also in the mainland. There is really only one place where Hinduism is still present in this region now, and that is this one island right here. Okay? And that is the island of Bali, and that is the last remnant of a larger Hindu kingdom that was in this area. So it is an outlier. There's very few Hindus are left in Indonesia. In fact, they tend to be fairly persecuted, and there have been a lot of conflict between the people in Bali and the rest of Indonesia. And about 80 to 85% of the Hindus in Indonesia actually live on the island of Bali. All right. And this is another example of that Hindu kingdom, and this is obviously a piece of the cultural landscape here, right? Religion showing up on the landscape. It started out as a Hindu temple, and then when Buddhism came in, it was converted to a Buddhist temple. And this is the heart of a very large religious and cultural complex here. This is called Angkor Wat. A wat is a temple. We'll see this shape in many different temples in this area. So this is another remnant of the ancient Hindu empire in the region, and then it was converted to Buddhism several hundred years ago, and it remains dedicated to Buddhism today. Okay? It is the world's largest religious monument. It is larger than the city of New York. So it is quite large. It's more than 400 acres. No, excuse me, 400 square miles, excuse me. And it is a key tourist site in Cambodia and an incredibly important piece of their national pride, of their history, and their sense of self, so much so that it is actually on their flag. Yep. And so you can see this is a huge piece of the complex. This is one of the most important temples. There's waterways, there's roads. This was part of a very extensive city. In fact, at one time, it was the largest city in the world. And there's some absolutely incredible art. You can see all of these very intricate carvings and faces. I mean, look at that. Look at all of these dancers and the different gods, and that you can see the jewelry they're wearing and the headpieces. It really is just absolutely incredible. Isn't that beautiful? So this is Angkor Wat. It's a piece of the cultural landscape. It reflects the Hindu past and then conversion to Buddhism in this area and the Buddhist present. All right, so there's the introduction. We will talk about Myanmar next.